Welcome to this rather unusual meeting of the Planning Committee. I'm still not sure in my own mind whether it is the right reference point, but nevertheless, we have in front of us a question which was put to full council, you will remember, and full council in their wisdom decided to refer it to us. So I'm going to take you straight to the agenda. Apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillors Heaney, Benison and Brown.
Thank you very much. Declarations, I don't suppose there is any declaration of interest, but no. We haven't received a question on Rule 37, and that then takes me straight to the main question. And so I'm going to ask Councillor Bray if he would read out his question and probably give us some of the salient points that he asked to bring to us. Councillor Bray.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, it's rather more emotion than a question, but I take your point. I think, firstly, I would like to apologise to the Planning Committee. I had no idea that a special meeting would be called to deal with this one single issue, and I'm still not really sure why it has been. But nonetheless, we are here, so here we are. But I apologise for being responsible for it. Secondly, also, please accept my apologies. Having a bit of a difficult time personally at the moment, so if I do drift off or if there's anything anybody doesn't understand, please do bring me back to it in question and I will try and put that right. Okay, the motion as written in your agenda came about over a period of time. I received a number of complaints in my particular ward from one particular development at Stone Hole. It's a development of just 10 houses and this development does not have anything to impose any restriction on the amount of dust it produces. I contacted enforcement. Enforcement went to see the developer who was, shall we say, not necessarily particularly helpful. And this went on backwards and forwards for a few occasions. Nothing was getting done. The situation was getting worse. And I want to just try and explain why this is an issue. The level of dust, we are not talking a little dust here. We are talking a situation where I would not be able to see you, Chairman, now during the course of a long, hot summer day. We are talking about a situation where people whose gardens were, the end of their garden was actually virtually on the development and their gardens are no more than 15, 20 feet long, were in a position where the dust was completely covering their properties, their vehicles. They could not open their windows despite the temperature outside being low to mid-30s, and they were finding that even with their windows closed, inside their properties, even their soft furnishings was being covered in dust. And they were quite naturally complaining. After several conversations with enforcement, I'd already made the suggestion that perhaps we could do a little bit more in future. Obviously, we can't fix this particular development, and perhaps there was something we could do that would be more effective long term. And at that point, I suggested that we could introduce a system whereby there is some form of condition, however it's worded, I'm just a councillor, that would prevent that sort of thing from happening again. But I'm given to understand that this is not the only development that has suffered from this problem. Certainly there have been many developments I'm aware of that have conditions that have suffered, and I'll refer to Walton certainly, where enforcement action was taken. Bentley, I believe, where enforcement action was taken. So quite clearly there is a case for this kind of action. After a long conversation with enforcement, I said that if they were not prepared to do anything, and they made it very clear that they weren't, then I would consider putting a motion forward to full council. I was told that I shouldn't do that, and they would contact me and discuss it further to see if there were any way we could move the situation forward. That was some 3 weeks prior to the deadline for putting a motion forward to the last full council meeting. I waited till 15 minutes before the deadline and then put the motion in because nobody had contacted me at all. Therefore, I felt I had no option but to raise the point as loudly as is needed, and this seemed the only logical way to do that, push it forward as a motion. So that's the reason that the motion came about. How badly have people been affected by the problem of dust, which doesn't sound that big in itself, but if you're sitting at the edge of it in your home, minding your own business, when a developer who's making substantial amounts of money is building all his houses and completely disregarding the effect it's having on you, it's pretty devastating. People simply could not use their cars. I know we're all drivers here, some here drive for a living. Imagine a situation where you came out in the morning and you actually had to wash your car before you could drive it because you could not see out of your windows. It would have been illegal to drive their cars. I saw that for myself. I know it to be true. People forced to stay inside their houses with their windows closed, absolutely unable to use their gardens for the entire summer. And in one case, and I can bring this gentleman to talk to you, a gentleman who was so affected by it because he suffered from breathing problems that he actually went and lived with his daughter for 2 weeks to avoid the problem. I passed that one on to officers at environmental health, and I was told that actually that makes it harder to enforce because it's not the developer's fault that the gentleman has breathing issues. That's what I was told. Okay. At that point, I must confess, I did become a little annoyed and I felt that we really needed to do something about it. And the problem we have with a situation like this, and I understand there are limitations and restrictions, and I'll work through those very quickly shortly. But when our committee, our planning committee, you, ladies and gentlemen, approve an application, you do not have the benefit of a crystal ball. We could easily say, well, we had a particularly hot summer last year, it may never happen again. True. There again, it might. It is not possible when giving a planning approval for you to know when it will be started or what the weather will be like when it is started. You cannot possibly know that in advance. Therefore, large or small, it is absolutely impossible for anybody to predict which developments will or will not cause a problem in future. You can't possibly know. Not without a crystal ball, and as far as I'm aware, you don't have one. Let's look very quickly at what actually happened when we did manage to get this problem sorted and what we actually required the developer to do, or what actually the developer did, because we didn't require anything, there were no condition. To fix the problem, in the end, the developer spent £35 on a hose pipe and £5 on a fine spray attachment for the end of it. Hung it over his bucket, switched on a tap, and the dust virtually disappeared. There was still dust, but nothing like the same level. That is what we are talking about here. The point that I'm trying to make is, in my opinion, it is not acceptable for us as a council, and as councillors, we represent the people, we don't represent developers. It is not acceptable for us to give planning consent or planning permission and then not have control to ensure that that consent is done in such a way as to minimise the harm to our existing residents. Our first job is to represent the residents. Developers are quite wealthy enough and capable enough of developing or representing, themselves. So we as councillors, in my opinion, should be able to do that. I'd like to very quickly go through the officers have very helpfully put forward the 6 points, which is on page 2, that are requirements within the National Policy Planning Framework. And I'd like to go through them one at a time very quickly, if I can, Chairman. Number 1 is necessary. Is it necessary? Well, if you live 50 miles away, probably not. But if it's at the bottom of your garden, probably yes. Clearly, it's considered necessary sometimes because if we look above, we learn from officers that a condition such as this is used, often used, on some developments. So therefore, it is clearly considered necessary at some point. My argument would be, it doesn't matter to you if the development that's causing you a problem is a big one or a small one. You still want protecting from the harm. Item 2, relevant to planning. Well, as I've just said, we already do it. So therefore it must be, mustn't it? Otherwise, we wouldn't already do it in some cases, quite clearly. And to the development being permitted, item 3. Well, I would say, as a councillor and a representative of the people, if we have developers who aren't prepared to undertake the simple task of suppressing their dust, they're not the kind of developers we should want building houses in our district, full stop. Item 4, enforceable. Clearly so. Has been done. Certainly was done in Walton and in Bentley, I believe, and in other areas. So such a condition is obviously enforceable because we have already in the past enforced it. Item 5, precise. Okay. I am a councillor. Along with other councillors, it is my job, all of our jobs, to make policy that benefits the people of Tendring. We put forward the policy. We receive, in an allowance, some £5,000 a year for doing that. We have extremely well paid, very educated, very professional and very experienced officers to deal with the matter of precise. A motion such as this sets the need for a condition. The exact wording of the condition we would leave to people far cleverer than me. We should leave to people far cleverer than me. It will be a wise thing to do. And finally, item 6, reasonable in all other respects. I think it's very, very reasonable for the people of Tendring to expect the planning authority that allows a planning development to take place to ensure that it has the power to minimise the harm and effect on our existing residents. In fact, I'd go further. I'd say it's extremely unreasonable for that not to be the case. We have to be responsible for what we do. And I would point out that the officer's vision of this probably differs slightly from mine, and that's because we come from a different perspective. It is the job of councillors to make policy, as I've already said. And let's be absolutely clear. It is ultimately councillors who will be held responsible for that policy. It is us as councillors who will have to go along to our residents and explain to them why there is nothing we can do about the situation they find themselves in. It is us who will have to tell the gentleman who had to run off and live with his sister for a fortnight, couldn't use his own house, that there's nothing we can do about that, despite the fact that it was us that gave the planning permission that caused the problem. That can never, ever be acceptable, in my opinion. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, I put forward this motion and I'm sure that you will wish to debate it. I am aware that there are complications. One thing that was drawn to my attention fairly quickly was my use of the word all developments. And of course, as is rightly pointed out, there are some developments that involve no construction whatsoever. I readily accept that, and I will be very, very happy for that to be changed to all construction-based developments. More than happy for that to happen. Quite clearly, that would need to be done. But let's be really clear. If this were placed as a condition on a development where it didn't matter, well then it wouldn't be enforced, would it? It would be redundant. If there is no dust, we could do nothing to prevent it because there's nothing to prevent. However, if it turns out that a development we did not expect to be a problem becomes one, we would actually be in a position to do something about it, where currently we are often not. I don't see that as acceptable. I therefore put forward this motion. It has been sent to this committee. Like the chairman, I'm not sure which committee it should have gone to. Probably this is the most sensible. I don't really know. I mean, it all seemed a bit... nobody really seemed to know where it was going, did they, really? But nonetheless, I leave myself in the hands of the committee. I hope that you will give this serious and sensible thought. There is nothing political about this motion. There's nothing devious about it. It is straightforwardly trying to protect ordinary people who find themselves on the edge of a development and suffer harm, varying harm, as a result, only to find that the council who gave that permission can do nothing to stop that harm. That is not acceptable. I don't believe it's acceptable to any right-thinking person. Thank you, Chairman. I'll leave you with that, and thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm happy to take questions if you're happy to let them come.
Right. Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to ask Head of Planning to reply, and then we will have our usual debate, if that's happy enough, if everybody is happy with that. So over to Kath, if she would.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll perhaps just run through the few paragraphs. Oh, beg your pardon. Thank you. I didn't do it. I hardly started. I was just going to expand a little bit on the paragraphs that I've drafted in your report. So the first one that follows straight on from Councillor Bray's motion was about really when, at the moment, the council do attach a condition about construction management. So at the moment, we attach that condition when requested by environmental health colleagues who look at the potential for dust or other nuisance to be created. When we're requested to by highways, so if there's likely to be an issue about the construction of the access or the roads within the site, and they're concerned particularly about dust and muck coming off the site. And thirdly, all major developments, and actually a lot of the larger minor developments, so the ones that fall within the minor category but are at the sort of bigger end of that. The condition can be tailored to fit the particular requirements of or requests of highways or health. It might well be a fairly standard condition, but then we'll put an informative on the end, sort of detailing the particular aspects that those consultees have asked to be addressed. The second part of my report here is about the government guidance about when to impose or how to impose conditions and the tests that need to be met. Firstly, apologies, I made reference to a paragraph in the MPPF which has, of course, changed in the new version. So it's now paragraph 56, not 206. The two key tests, I think, for this one are whether it's necessary. And so the test there really is, would it be, the alternative would be to refuse planning permission. So is the proposal, the development that's proposed, so unacceptable without that condition that planning permission would be refused? And clearly it would be in many cases. If it was a large development and we weren't in proper control of the construction management, then yes, it would, but not always. And now there's actually some new regulations have come out in October that require the local planning authorities for planning permissions, with the exception of outline planning permissions, to gain the agreement of the applicant for pre-commencement conditions. So we can no longer impose pre-commencement conditions on planning permissions without the agreement of the applicant. And if they don't agree, then we're obviously left with the decision to approve it without that condition or refuse planning permission. So that kind of really focuses the mind that it's not a theoretical thing, would it be okay to refuse planning permission without that condition? Yet it's actually something we will now have to do if we don't think it's acceptable without it. And the other test I think that's particularly relevant is number 3. Is it about the development to be permitted? So yes, as I said before, I think it would be relevant to lots of developments to attach this condition, but clearly not to all. Councillor Bray has already mentioned changes of use, for instance, is recognised it wouldn't be there. I think there probably are some operational developments where it wouldn't be necessary because they're so minor in scale, or they're isolated from other developments. They're not going to affect anybody. So I think you should look at them individually rather than having a complete sort of blanket approach would be my advice. And then at the bottom of this section of the report, talking about complaints, I did ask for a quick snapshot of the sort of complaints we've had in this year. I haven't been back and double-checked it, so I'm not going to claim this is absolutely comprehensive and robust. But of the 13 listed here as being complaints received since January until now this year, 12 of those 13 had a condition on requiring a construction method statement that had been discharged. And so we had complaints about those sites, and the response was to contact the developer, draw to their attention that condition, and seek compliance with that condition. As I say, there might have been some other sites we've had complaints about that aren't on this list. I haven't double-checked it. But I suppose the point I'm making is that those criteria I described at the beginning, that actually a lot of permissions do have this condition attached, seems to be sort of backed up by where we're getting complaints that condition is there. We do respond reactively on enforcement primarily, and so we do rely on people drawing our attention to breaches. There have been one or two sites this summer that have been quite difficult to get a quick result, if you like, in terms of reducing the dust issue. But actually, the vast majority seem to respond really quickly and try to do what they could to reduce the problem. Chairman, that's all I wanted to draw your attention to at the moment.
Right, thank you. For the purpose, I'm just going to ask the question. You mentioned two sites specifically. Walton was one, but the other one was?
Yeah, sorry, the other one was in Great Bentley. I can't
Great
tell
Bentley.
you the name of it. I'm not great at remembering numbers, John.
I just wondered whether they were on the list. That
if I can just add to that, I know that Kath did state that she hadn't double-checked the figures. I'm aware of at least 11 complaints from smaller developments where there is none. I have copies of those complaints.
Right. Right, the Great Bentley one is on the list, so that was one that we did. And also the Walton one, so they are both covered. Right, councillors. Yes, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, interesting. As I've got a site in my ward that has caused no end of problems, but unfortunately that was, yeah, we won't go there. With regard to the enforcement side of it, I presume we use, or our enforcement officers use, the act of persuasion, good tact and guile. But if we have a developer that just refuses, doesn't do as he's told, do we make a note of that as to if they come forward later on and look at it proactively if they don't comply with the conditions from, say, a permission in 2017-18, when they come forward next year and put it forward, we will robustly look at the conditions we impose to make sure that they do as they're told? Or would that be the case? That's for Kath.
Would you? Yes, like.
A sort of proactive approach to that kind of monitoring is something that we're just establishing. The criteria we're looking at for that proactive monitoring are the really large sites will be in there, sites where planning officers, the case officer, realises through their visit that there's a very close relationship with perhaps neighbouring properties where it would be really helpful to be proactive on that. And I suppose there is a kind of high-risk category, if you like, which I think is the one you're describing about perhaps where we haven't had good experiences with developers in the past. And I think our approach on all of those will be to make an early visit to the site just to let people know that we are being proactive and we will be monitoring what happens on the site.
Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Chair. Now that this has been brought before us, we're duty bound to look at it and to give it an airing and come to a conclusion. The area in which I represent has been subject to many problems. The worst one is a concrete grinding machine that spewed dust all over 4 neighbouring houses. Now, those people, when they'd all packed in and went away, didn't realise that they had the right to complain. And I'm wondering how many people are subjected to this kind of torture. And I think it's bad enough that planning applications can drag on for quite a few years before they're started, and then having to endure such things afterwards, such as dust and all kinds of noise-related problems. It's like a sword of Damocles hanging over the residents' head. They're expected to continue to pay and to be good citizens, where around them developers appear on occasions, very rarely, but on occasions do appear not to take up that gauntlet. This is a can of worms, isn't it? Why has it been passed to us? Because now we're opening this up to all kinds of other venues that could, and conditions that we could add to this. And we could add, I don't know, highways, trees, or anything that we wish to add on to it as a condition. Because I believe that we should have dealt with this at source, or maybe in a completely different committee. I do not believe that this is the right venue for this particular item, and I think it's unfair on the planning officers themselves. There is a framework by which we work, and I think you'll agree, Kath, that we work quite stringently to that framework. Councillors tend to wobble a wee bit occasionally away from it, but we stay within that framework and we come to a good conclusion. I don't know what my other colleagues feel, but I feel that this is the wrong place for this right tonight.
I would add, I think I do agree with you. However, full council has referred the question to us, and hopefully we'll come up with an answer. Councillor McWilliams.
Thank you, Chairman. Just wanted to relate, because Great Bentley was obviously mentioned. I know that I contacted at least 3 occasions, but I also was very fortunate that my residents were so incensed they actually filmed what was going on, which I was then able to send over to the young lady that dealt with the enforcement side. And even she said, my goodness, Linda, I didn't realise it was as bad as that. So it just goes to show that there is some other ways of getting evidence over in case there's any question of doubt. And having said that, there was another smaller development near where I live. It was quite horrendous, but the developer, he was out there in no time at all with water, and he was on it with a JCB to make sure that it actually compounded everything down so it was out of the way. Now, that was a small development, and I don't believe he had any condition put on him to do that. So there are some that actually react and they respond, but I can appreciate that, like the one that we had in Bentley, I don't believe they would have done the necessary if it wasn't for the fact that there was the evidence and the proof on a bit of film. It might have made that much more difference. Can I also mention, while we're talking about it, and dust, these larger developments, in this particular incident, goodness knows why, they just chose to put all their spoil along the back line of these bungalows. The whole lot was just piled up behind the bungalows. Why do that when there was an empty space of fields and goodness knows what further away? And these poor people were having to put up with it right there. So is there something more to be considered, I wonder, in when developers are actually starting to take the world apart, but don't leave it on somebody else's doorstep? But there, I just felt I needed to mention that one as well, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Everett.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Bray said that there were 10 houses involved in this. My understanding of the NPPF definitions is that 10 housing development would count as a major development, and Kath said in her introduction to this part that all major developments have this condition put on them. Is there an opportunity here, because I'm guessing that this would have been done before the new NPPF, so therefore that would have been when there was a larger number of houses seen as a major development. Is there an opportunity here for us to change our policy to catch smaller numbers of houses under this umbrella?
Thank you for that. Yes, if you'd like to take that one.
Yeah, I mean, the putting on the conditions is sort of discretionary, isn't it? You have to use your judgment on each case. There is an opportunity for us to think about putting them on more often and with some smaller scale development. I think I'm a little bit nervous about having hard and fast rules, if you like, about numbers. Excuse me. Because there will be occasions when something is quite isolated, when it wouldn't be appropriate, even if there were 15 houses, it wouldn't really be justified. but I'm more than happy to sort of tighten up, if you like, and reduce the scale. I think this summer, sorry. It's the dust. This dry summer has highlighted this particular issue in a way that I think we haven't experienced it before, and we've noticed that environmental health colleagues in particular are becoming more stringent about their consideration of the construction management plans that do come in. So where there is a condition and they come in, and we've had a few sort of sent back where we haven't really experienced that in the past. And I think that's their response to this, this summer when we have had more complaints.
Right. Councillor Holmes.
I can't see why this has even come to us because, let's face it, nearly every planning permission we admit to, we agree to, has got this condition on it. I mean, it's worked out of 12 of the last 13 this year. It's worked with Jeff's because they solved it with a bucket of water and a hose pipe. Sorry? 6 weeks. No, you can't do it immediately. I mean, I don't know, can we shut the sites down straight away? I don't know what the condition is. But nothing that we're here for tonight is going to make this enforcement any quicker or any more deliberate. It's exactly the same as what we've already got. It's just dust. I mean, this has been a hell of a year for heat. I've worked on hundreds of building sites and I've seen dust created by building, but there are ways and means, and I'm sure that the enforcement of when they get the complaint, as Jeff said, that, or not Jeff, Morris, that they didn't know that they could complain. If it was me and it was giving me the ump over a period of time, I would get onto the builder or the council. I would get onto somebody. It's just a case of we are a moaning race. So I can't honestly see what this has got anything, why we should pass anything here or agree to, because it's already in the rules and regs of our remit, the planning's remit. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got two questions then, a bit of a statement really. I scribbled down when I think Councillor Everett was asking this question. Can officers put in a potential recommendation for conditions for this, if it might be necessary, provided it meets the criteria obviously laid down? The second one, has a construction management statement condition ever been changed at appeal, having such a condition removed or amended? Bit of homework. And last week, I can't remember if we said yes or no, actually, the retirement living place in Kirby Road, Great Holland. Did we say yes? I can't remember. But there's actually there's a construction method statement in there, and number 7 is measures to control the emission of dust and dirt during construction. Now, we obviously didn't go into that in detail, but I just wonder why that condition was put into that application and what was the justification for that and maybe not another, if that makes sense. I know it's a specific application and we've dealt with it, but it's specifically in there. Thank you.
Yes, I'm just going to ask Kath to pick up. You raised 2 points. A, why did suddenly it appear in the Kirby one? And the previous point, I think you noted, Kath, did you not?
Well, the Kirby application was a major application, wasn't it? It was quite significant, so that would be our normal approach, to attach a condition of that sort to that one. And I don't know whether a construction method statement has ever been removed during an appeal here. Yeah, I don't know that without going and double checking, I'm afraid.
The first question was officers put in a potential recommendation for conditions if it's necessary, provided it meets the criteria. So that would be for a smaller development. It wouldn't just be automatic. Because I see what you were saying, Kathy. You don't want it to be across the board, every single application, there's a construction method statement, because they'll be challenged. which obviously will just take up officers' time unnecessarily. So I think if we're going to support the motion or an amendment to it or whatever is eventually we agree or disagree on, I think that's quite important, that question. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I understand the question. I think that's about our practice, if you like, isn't it, about when we attach a condition. And absolutely, case officers should be thinking on every application which conditions are necessary, relevant, etc., and meet the tests. And one of those should be, is a construction method statement necessary. And I think there's some learning from this summer that actually the potential for nuisance from dust is quite high, and perhaps need to scrutinise that more closely. So yes, I think that it would be better to leave it as a kind of discretionary thing. It needs to be considered on an individual basis. That absolutely can be done.
Good. Councillor Everett.
Thank you. I found it really interesting looking at this particular issue because it shows that there may be perhaps need for other conditions that we hadn't thought about before, or use of existing conditions that we already have on smaller developments. But I don't think it stops there, and this is the can of worms that Morris was referring to. I think it actually goes a lot further. For instance, about a year ago, there was an issue relating to a planning permission that we gave for what's now called Kengatwood Close. And there were huge issues after that development about repairing the road back to the condition it was before the development started. And at that time, this council spoke to the county council about how they might decide or they might support a condition, an appropriate condition, to be made on all planning permissions, fully accept what we've already said about all planning permissions, to rectify that particular problem on other developments. That was taken by the county member, Mark Platt, to county and has got sign-off from county, and it has been sent back to this council to consider. And when this motion was sent to this committee by the chairman of the council, Mark Platt, he made the comment that other issues may need to be discussed at this meeting on other conditions, and that was the condition that he was referring to. And it seems to me that actually that is just the start of it. There could well be other issues that perhaps we should consider for a general tidy up or look at conditions that would be in the benefit, to the benefit of our populace. For instance, the one that I asked a question of this, the chairman of this committee some time ago. So I'm wondering, and at this stage it is a wonder, whether perhaps we should be broadening out this discussion, not just about dust suppression, but other possible areas that we might wish to take a steer on as well. And I use the word steer quite deliberately because I fully accept Kath's point that she needs to have the ability to duck and dive around this. We can't just give her, it will be done. We've got to give her some ability to work out when it is appropriate. But I do think it is possible that we should be looking at other areas as well.
Yeah, if I could sort of guide you a little bit on that, tonight we are considering specifically dust. And I'd remind you, it was the very councillor who wanted to bring in other things, was the chairman of the council who asked us to do this. But can of worms is a good description, I think. There will be other things that we might consider, but I'm trying to steer you to say, no, tonight we're looking at specifically dust. That's the subject. Otherwise, the list is probably endless of things that we would like to see in. So let us try and get something out of the dust one first, I think. Other speakers, Councillor Baker.
Yeah, we'd be here all night, wouldn't we, if we start adding bits to this. I know exactly what you're talking about, because we, as committee members, have received emails from members of the public about that very specific thing. Maybe it's a discussion that we could have outside of this committee. It may be a members' briefing or a specific planning training, and then we can bring everything to the table, maybe ask officers to put a report together of some sort, not too big and not too long, because they've got enough to do as it is. But yes, I can see, otherwise we're going to have motion after motion and extra planning meetings, which obviously will impact on everybody's time.
Good. Other speakers? Unusual, but I'll invite you.
Sorry, Chairman, if this were a full council debate, I would be given the opportunity to sum up. Am I given that opportunity here? It'll be very, very fast. It's very, very sweet. It's your call, Chairman's decision.
He can speak with your permission.
Yes, I would give you a chance. Let me just say that are there any further points that want to be raised? Bear in mind that Councillor Bray actually has a minor amendment to his question already, in that he's taken the word all future planning applications to read now construction-based planning applications. That's my understanding. They were the words I took down. Councillor Everett, if you wish to speak before he does. Yes.
Thank you. In the spirit of trying to help that discussion along, and mindful exactly what the head of planning has just said to us about having some ability to look at the appropriateness, etc., I wondered whether it might be helpful to word our suggestion differently, and this is my suggestion for what it is worth. This Council resolves that where applicable for planning consents awarded by this Council, the following conditions should be considered. During development, the constructor-developer will take all reasonable steps using dust suppression techniques to ensure that, as far as reasonably practical, residents living in near proximity to the site are not adversely affected by construction-related dust. And that's an attempt to try and pull that together. I don't know whether that is helpful or not.
Councillor Holmes has got his hand up.
Councillor Holmes?
Yeah, I don't mean to sound disrespectful on this, Jeff, but it seems completely out of the question that we should even be attempting to put this into the motion or whatever you want to call it, because next week we'll have another one about the potholes. The week after we'll have dirt being spilt on the road. They are all taken care of, as far as I'm aware, building regulations, national regulations, the conditions that we actually put on planning as it stands, and I'm sure that the officers have got more than enough on their agenda, should I say, to go and sort out any problem. Every problem that we've had has been sorted. It's not as though you need a specific rule or a motion or whatever, because there's no point. It's already there. This one here is just purely and simply for dust. I mean, you're going to get dust on a building site anyway, and if it gets too much, they come to the council, we go to the officers decide that it needs enforcing, and it gets done. It gets done. It's not being done, is it? Thank you.
Right. Yes, okay, I was thinking of beginning to wind it up, but I've now got... let's go to Councillor Cawthorne, because he hasn't spoken yet.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Everett's rewording of the motion to be where applicable is surely where we are already with the entire planning process, and I think it makes the motion completely irrelevant. And I would recommend that we do not recommend it to Council. Thank you.
I'll second that.
Right. Well, we'll have a chance of a vote in a moment. Bear in mind, I, on your behalf, have got to report something back to the Council. So whether it's that motion or any other. Councillor Baker?
Sorry, can I just butt in for a second, Chairman, with your permission? Essentially, what the committee tonight has got three options. It can recommend to Council that the motion be supported in its original format. It can recommend to Council that it does not support the motion in its original format, which is what Councillor Cawthorne has just moved and Councillor Holmes has seconded. And the third option the committee has is to recommend that an amended motion be supported.
Right, Councillor Baker.
Could I just ask Ian? Obviously, Councillor Everett has put forward different wording to the original motion.
He wasn't seconded.
No. Okay.
He wasn't seconded.
I don't think anybody was given the chance to.
We've already got a motion.
Right. Okay. That actually explains it. So at the moment, we are dealing with the motion that's on the table, which has been proposed and seconded, that we do not support.
That's correct. Yes.
Right. If there's no further discussions, I will go to Councillor Bray now to let him to sum up.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, that's quite disappointing. I'm very disappointed that people aren't supporting the residents and are preferring to support developers. To be clear, the situation where this has already been dealt with is not the case. The reason we're here is because there was not a condition, and therefore when people, including councillors, complained to officers, they were not able to do anything about it. That is why we're here, to put councillors and officers in a position where they can do something about it. And I take on board the comments made earlier by Councillor McWilliams. Not all developers are bad. Most developers are good. Most developers wouldn't need this. The idea of this motion, if you like, was to deal with the bad, stop the bad, without adversely affecting the good, because, of course, if there is no problem, there would not be any enforcement. Simple as that. Also, if I could just very quickly come back to something the Head of Planning said, which related to properties that were a long way out and weren't affected. If you read the motion, it does actually cover that. The motion does say, as far as possible, existing residents living in near proximity to a construction are not adversely affected. So the motion had already dealt with that. It would be very disappointing if this fell. That would be, in my opinion, a defeat for residents, a victory for developers. In any normal circumstances, dust that covers your house and your car would be considered antisocial behaviour. It's a pity that we as a council choose to treat developers as something different. Thank you.
Right. I'm going to ask the solicitor now, just to make sure, as I understand it, we have a proposal and a seconder to say that we do not support this motion. That would fall in Ian's third category, I should think. Or second, it could be in a second category, couldn't it? It's not support as it is, so right. I shall ask for a vote on that in a minute. Now we've got a proposal on the floor. Ask you to vote on those in favour of the motion, that is no support to the proposal. Those in favour, please show. 1, 2. And those against, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In that case, that motion is lost. Now it's open again to a further proposal. Councillor Everett.
The one I said before, do you want me to read it out again? Would that be helpful?
Yes.
Yeah. This council resolves that where applicable for planning consents awarded by this council, the following conditions should be considered. During construction development, the constructor developer will take all reasonable steps using dust suppression techniques to ensure that, as far as reasonably practical, residents living in near proximity to the site are not adversely affected by construction-related dust.
Right. That's the proposal, Councillor Alexander.
I'd like to second that proposal. Right. I think the chairman of the TDC sent it over to us. It's a complicated piece. Well, I think we've given it a lot of airing and a lot of time, and I think the only people who benefit from this are the residents of TDC.
Right. Before... Yes, Councillor Baker.
Could I just confirm, if I heard Councillor Everett correctly, where this council has awarded planning permission, should that not be approved planning permission? Or did I mishear?
I think Ian's got the proposal here, so...
The actual word does say awarded by this council. I don't know whether that would be a...
I would suggest granted.
Granted? Okay.
Right, I'm going to...
Could I also... Sorry,
sorry.
Chairman.
Okay.
Obviously, we're changed... I mean, Councillor Everett has amended the original motion. Does he intend to take out number 2 completely then? The planning inspectorate.
Mm-hmm. Well, before I put that to the vote, I'm just going to ask Head of Planning, as I always do, for motions. Kath.
Thank you, Chair. As I understood the motion, it was about making sure that planning officers do consider the need to attach that condition each and every time they recommend that planning permission be granted, and I think that is a workable, workable motion or approach.
Right.
Chairman, I would accept the amendment put forward by Councillor Everett with no problems.
Okay. Right. You now know I'm going to get Ian to read it finally with the amendments.
Thank you, Chairman. So what's been proposed by Councillor Everett and seconded by Councillor Alexander is that essentially this committee is going to recommend to Council that an amended motion be supported when it goes back to Council on the 27th of November. And the amended wording that this Council's recommending is that Councillor Bray's motion be amended to read, this Council resolves that, where applicable, for planning consents granted by this Council, the following conditions should be considered. During development, the constructor/developer will take all reasonable steps using dust suppression techniques to ensure that, as far as reasonably practicable, residents living in near proximity to the site are not adversely affected by construction-related dust.
That gets nods. So, yes, Councillor Cawthron.
Yeah, can I ask a question about the wording of this? It's saying for every application where permission has been granted, we consider a condition. The conditions are considered before the application is granted or refused. I don't see how the wording makes any sense.
Yeah, let's...
What copies? That would have been... Yes, that's probably more
Planning applications. Cross that consent, planning application, recommend for approval.
recommended. Yeah, that's.
This will obviously be subject to the mover and the seconder agreeing that the changed wording. So it would read, subject to Councillor Everett's and Alexander's agreement, this council resolves that where applicable for planning applications that are recommended for approval by this council, the following conditions should be considered, and then it will follow on as it was originally.
Okay.
Yeah, Councillor Everett and Councillor Alexander are happy with that, Chairman.
They've approved it. Right, that's what you're going to vote on now. So those in favour of that revised motion, please show. 3, 6, and you can add me for 7. Yeah. And those against? 1. John, 1. That is then the revision that will be put to full council. Yes, that completes that particular item. Thank you very much, and completes that agenda. Just a reminder to you all that the next training session will be on recent appeals, and that is on Tuesday the 6th of November, when the subject that Councillor Everett has been discussing on emails will be taken up. So it's Tuesday the 6th of November. It is the one that's in the diary, it's not a new one. So. 6 o'clock here.
Oh, it's planning training.
Yep. After all, thank you all very much. Thank the officers. And those that do want to watch Coronation Street can still do so. Oh.